This girl was beaten and unalived by two people she thought were her friends and then left in a forest. Brianna Gay was only 16 years old. She loved TikTok, she was smart, she was just trying to find her place in the world, just like any other teenager. I do want to give a trigger warning right away for the unaliving of a minor, so if you think that is going to be harmful for your mental health, please just don't watch this video. It's not worth it. I will see you in my next one. Also, quick little disclaimer that I am just a girl, I'm not a lawyer. All of this information is free on the internet, so if you know more about a case than I do, and if any of this information is incorrect, please just politely correct me in the comments. Don't be mean to me. Thank you. But on February 11th, 2023, she was lured to Lunier Park in Warrington, England, by two classmates, two kids that she thought were her friends, a boy and a girl. The three all agreed to meet up and hang out, so Brianna thought that this was just another hangout with her friends at a park. But in reality, they had been planning to unalive her for weeks. Apparently, they had a whole list of people that they wanted to unalive, and Brianna was just the beginning. That afternoon, CCTV caught her walking calmly toward the park she had no idea she wouldn't walk out of, and her body was discovered by a dog walker at 3:13 p.m. She had been stabbed 28 times in her head, neck, chest, and back. This scene was brutal, heartbreaking, inhumane. The boy and the girl who took her life were only 15 years old. And after the cruel act, what they did was left her body in the dirt and went to a store to buy butter to go home and make pancakes. Like, what? How are you so calm after doing something like that? And when police started digging, they found something horrifying. Discord messages, a manifesto, and a step-by-step plan for the attack. One of them even filmed the aftermath. No one believed that this was an impulsive decision, that these were impulsive kids. No, this was a planned and calculated attack. They later talked about wanting to feel, quote, euphoric while unaliving someone. The two friends were brought to trial and the girl confessed and pleaded guilty while the boy tried to deny it but was later found guilty. In January of 2024, both were sentenced to life in prison with the minimum sentence of 20 years. The judge called their actions, quote, sadistic torture because neither showed an ounce of remorse. Thank you for listening to Brianna's story. This one is so sad to me because it did not need to happen. They were teenagers. I don't understand it, but it is so sad. If you have any other cases you want me to cover, please leave them in the comments. I post true crime videos just like this one every single day, so if you enjoy this type of content, follow so you don't miss my next video, and please stay safe out there. You never know what's right around the corner.
Spooky story time. A follower that wants to remain anonymous sent me the story and we're going to call it The Voice Downstairs. For the sake of the story, we're going to call her Chelsea. Chelsea says that last year she was at her best friend's house to celebrate her birthday along with a few other friends. And she says that her best friend's mom has told her that she's able to see shadow figures and lots of other things because she's always meditating and she opened up her crown chakra. Chelsea says that she thinks that that's what it's called. At first, Chelsea thought that she was kidding because for the past 2 years, she's never experienced anything. Her best friend's mom's bedroom is in the basement, so they went down there to talk to the mom. They were playing with the cat. They were just chilling. And Chelsea was getting ready to leave, so she tells her best friend's mom bye, and her best friend go around the corner towards the stairs so they could leave. As they're going to the stairs, they clearly hear, "Hey." And Chelsea says that this was not a whisper. It sounded like it was literally right next to them. She says that they look at each other, they sprint upstairs, and they nervously laugh it off. So they decided to text her best friend's mom and ask her, "Hey, by any chance, did you say hey to us? Were you trying to call us? Were you trying to talk to us? Anything at all?" And of course, her best friend's mom said no. She has no idea what this was, what this could have been, and luckily she's never had any more experiences in that house again. She says that it was so clear and she cannot put a face to this voice, but she says that this voice sounded familiar. So it wasn't either of them. It wasn't the mom, so who else could it have been? They were the only 3 people down there. She says it was so casual, so clear, and she's like, is it possibly a mimic? What do you guys think? Thank you so much to Chelsea for sending me this spooky story. If you guys have any other stories that you'd like for me to read, please send them via DM or email, and I'd love to read them, and I will see you guys in the next spooky story. Bye!
feel like this is a lot of our biggest fears for people who like drive in the middle of the night, but more specifically for trailer drivers. So this guy said that this happened to him a few years ago when he was driving a trailer, and at the time he did have a partner with him. He said that they would typically drive at night and that they would take turns, and the roads that they would be in did not have a lot of people driving back and forth on. He does admit that there were some nights where like he would be driving but he would be very tired, but he knew that his partner was also extremely tired, so they would try to keep themselves awake and just try to be safe on the road. So there was one night where he was driving, his partner was actually sitting next to him. He just wanted to make sure that they both stayed awake, and he admits that the sound of the trailer on the lonely road and the radio started mixing in with themselves, and that his partner was really fighting to sleep, and he just told him, hey, you should go to bed, like just go to sleep, you need to get some rest. He also remembers thinking to himself in that moment, like, fuck, I'm also just as sleepy as he is, like how am I supposed to continue on? It was there that he saw something. Figure appeared in his window as he's driving, but he couldn't make out any facial features. It almost looked like it had a hood on. What he was able to see was that the thing, like the eyes were glowing, they were really bright. He said that this figure starts talking to him in a very firm voice and says, keep driving, don't stop the trailer, keep driving, don't stop the trailer. His heart started beating so fast and he started thinking, what is this thing, who is this person, and why do I want to listen to him? And that he was listening to him, he just kept going and he wasn't stopping the trailer. Then all of a sudden his partner, who had been asleep next to him, woke up, screams at him, like screams his name, and points in front of them on the road. He was about to go straight when the road was turning into a curve. He did say that he hit the brakes really hard and he thought that they were gonna crash, but thankfully they didn't. And when the trailer completely stopped, he told his partner about the figure that was at his window talking to him and how for some reason he was listening. They did end up continuing on the road, but only for a few miles, because they ended up at this really small town where there was a gas station and there was a spot where they could park the trailer. Some guy from that town ended up coming up to them and they started talking and told him that something weird happened on the road, and the guy literally tells them that there is a curve up ahead where a lot of people have lost their lives, and that the people who have crashed but didn't end up passing away have claims that some negative spirit or energy had shown up in the window of their car that caused them to have those accidents. Honestly, I thought the story was gonna be like, oh, I was tired, I hallucinated, like, yeah, we need to stop and get some rest. Other people have crashed there, so like, can you imagine? Not only was he tired, but like an apparition basically almost made him crash and possibly pass away. There's other people who believe that it could be somebody who crashed there and now for some reason shows up and tries to do the same thing to others. Anyway, what do you guys think that is?
The only thing more baffling to me than missing persons cases are when that missing person then reappears over a decade later. She literally came back from the dead. She'd been declared legally dead years earlier. It was 2002 in Lititz in Pennsylvania. Brenda Heiss was a seemingly normal mother of two from the area who was working as an accountant. She had a son and a daughter aged 12 and 8. Now, on the day she vanished, everything seemed to be fairly normal. She put some food out to defrost later and she took her kids to school. She'd been doing a good job of keeping the normal household routine together despite the fact that she was actually going through a divorce. It kind of seemed to everybody like her kids were keeping her going, keeping her in a normal routine. That's why it was so worrying when she all of a sudden just vanished. She never picked her kids up from school that day. She never even contacted anybody to say where she was. Now, obviously, due to her recent divorce, police started looking immediately into her ex, her husband. As bad as it sounds, they were wondering if he had killed her out of anger, revenge, or for financial gain. But her husband Lee seemed just as confused as everybody else, to be fair, and just as eager to get her home. Months and months went by with absolutely no sign of the missing mother. There was also no sign of foul play, no reason to believe any harm had come to her. Years and years rumbled on, and eventually Lee actually went to court to have her declared legally dead. He was then obviously able to remarry if he wanted to. He was able to claim on her life insurance policy too. Now, this again did kind of raise some eyebrows in the community. Neighbours did feel kind of suspicious of him about this, but really nobody had any proof. And sadly, her children had come to terms with the fact that their mum wasn't coming home. That was until 11 years later. Bear in mind her family really had moved on at this point. Her daughter Morgan was 19 years old. She was attending college. She'd had a whole chunk of her childhood without a mom, when all of a sudden, into a police station in Florida, walked Brenda. By this point, it was April 2013. So many years had gone by. She told police officers that she was a missing woman, and at first they were a little bit confused, but she gave them all her details. She then revealed her absolutely unbelievable story to authorities. She said the day that she vanished, she did so of her own accord. She'd suddenly randomly decided on the spur of the moment to join a bunch of hitchhikers who were homeless, who were moving to Florida. She decided to abandon her children to sleep on the streets and sometimes even scavenge in bins for food. She would sit on the street corners and beg for money. She'd obviously not told anyone her real name, and she'd just been sharing tents with strangers and sleeping rough. And the only reason she wanted to hand herself in was that she was tired of being homeless. And when her children found out, they were understandably pretty upset and angry and reluctant to reunite with her. And honestly, I don't know how I would deal with that. I don't know how I would process that information. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think you would ever be able to forgive your mum for doing that?
Let's talk about when kids hear things that are not there. If you're new here, hi. I usually talk about some pretty scary stuff, and today I'm going to be talking about a story that my longtime family friend actually told me the other day. So just for context purposes, these people have 2 children under the age of 3, and they have just moved into this older home. And in this home, it is a split level entry home where they have baby gates at the top of the stairs and at the other set of stairs that lead into the basement. So visually, they have a baby gate at the top of the stairs, and then at the very bottom of the second set of stairs, they have another baby gate. And he specifically says that the one in the basement is so old and rickety that you really have to shake it to get it to open. But anyways, his wife was home with the babies, and they were just hanging out in the living room. And in the living room, you can clearly see, like, over the banister, you can see the front door, you can see, like, who's coming in and out of the home. And they're just playing, watching TV, whatever, when all of a sudden, his wife and his oldest baby hear the shaking of the baby gate that is in the basement. And she immediately stops and kind of looks at her kid because he heard it too. And she even asked him, like, what was that? And their son responds with, "Daddy's home?" And she's like, "No, he's not home. He's not supposed to be home right now." And I can't remember the exact conversation that they were having with this 2.5-year-old, but it eventually came down to, I'm not going down there. And when he was telling me this story, I immediately look at him and I look at my boyfriend and I'm like, I told you that there was something weird. And what I'm about to tell y'all is 100% real. I did not know anything about this house. I did not know anything about this story. I didn't know anything about anything. They had me go over to their house and watch their kids so they could have like a date night. I said, sure, fine. They offered to have my boyfriend over as well because they know him, they know me. And originally, I told my boyfriend that I was just going to go by myself and whatever because it wasn't going to be very hard and the kids were going to be asleep and I was just like to watch the house. Probably 3 days before I'm supposed to do this, I'm just getting this feeling in my stomach and I don't want to go to their house by myself. And I don't know why. So I am begging my boyfriend to come, and thankfully he said yes. And it makes sense why I was feeling that way now. Oh, and after my family friend is like describing this entire story to me, he just ends the story by saying like, yeah, it's really weird because I think something's following me because everywhere I go and everywhere I live, something weird is happening. And I was just looking at him like, what? And then he doubles down and he says, yeah, everywhere I live, something weird happens. And I talk about this topic a lot on my page about how children seeing things, dolls, kids, it just freaks me out. Did you hear that? As you can tell, I am trying to be proactive and film a lot of videos, which is why I'm wearing the same thing in multiple videos in a row. This is the second video where I think I got something and you can barely hear it. Just a little in the background, I don't know. But anything with dolls and kids and anything where someone else is able to see something and you are not, don't like it. Don't like it. And I think it really boils down to children in my brain because I'm one of those people that believes that children are able to see things that adults are not because their minds are more open to seeing things. But anyways, that's going to do it for me. Stay tuned for more ghost stories. So I wasn't even gonna make a video about this, but if this is actually happening, people need to know. There is something called the Long Walk. And many people thought it was just a conspiracy or just rumors online, but this is actually happening. The government supposedly selects 50 boys without explanation, and once they're chosen, they're in. And they have to walk at exactly 3 miles per hour. No breaks, no sleep, no food. And what's crazy is that if you slow down or stop, they issue you a warning. If you are issued 3 warnings, they take you out right then and there because there are soldiers following these 50 boys the entire time. And they keep going until there is one person standing. And that person gets the prize, which is allegedly anything the winner wants for the rest of their life. But at what cost? I mean, if they're willing to do this now, what comes next?
I have another creepy story about Epping Forest. This one comes from a woman who, after separating with her husband, who she has 4 children with, decides to move out of London and move somewhere a little bit safer and a bit more quiet. She chooses a house in Epping Forest. Instantly on moving in, the vibes are just not good. The house that she had seen when she came to look around was nice, it seemed bright, it seemed airy, but as soon as she moved in, the vibes seemed to change. The house was always cold. It was grey, it was grim. She had always been like a social person, and now she didn't want to leave the house. Even though the house just didn't have homely vibes, she never wanted to go out. She didn't want to see her friends. She has 4 children. One day they are all out playing in the garden and she is in the kitchen. She can see them playing outside the entire time. She looks up and there is a man and a woman talking to her children. There are no boundaries to her garden. It is just the forest. So immediately her heart sinks and she runs outside. But by the time she gets out there, they are gone. They are nowhere to be seen. These 2 random people that she's just witnessed with her own eyes have just disappeared into the tree line. And she can tell by her children's body language that they are scared and they are not happy. And by the time she gets out there, all 4 of the children are running back towards their mum and back towards the back door. When they come in, they immediately tell their mum that the 2 people standing outside said that this is their house and they need to leave. She calls her ex-husband and she lets him know what's just happened, and he is very unhappy with the whole situation. He's unhappy with how the house feels, he's unhappy with the change that he has seen in his ex-wife, and now that this is happening, he just feels very uncomfortable about the entire move. So he comes over the very next day and he starts to put fences up. One night she is up in bed and she hears a landline ring, and they do not have a landline, but it sounds like it's coming from inside her house. Because they are conjoined to the house next door, she thinks maybe it's their landline, and so she tries to go back to sleep. A few nights after that, again she hears the same landline, and this time it is 3 a.m. and she is thinking, who on earth could be calling them on a landline at this time in the morning? So at this point she's now awake and she hears a thudding, like a rhythmic thudding, and then she realizes that that thudding sounds like it's coming from inside her house. And so she goes outside, she creeps down her stairs, and she sees that in her kitchen the back door is wide open and the wind is banging it on one of her kitchen walls. She calls her ex-husband and he comes straight round, and he goes out into the garden with a torch, and they see that their back fence has been knocked down completely, the fence that he has just put up. He decides that he's going to stay on the sofa because, again, he is feeling so uncomfortable about the entire thing. They start to think that it's actually the neighbours, who they haven't even met yet. That week, the ex-husband makes it his business to speak to next door. And when he finally does meet the neighbours, they are a couple in their late 20s and they do not have a landline. So he asks them, would your phone be ringing at 3 a.m? And they both say no. So he just decides that he's going to prolong his stay for a few more days. And one night when he's sleeping on the sofa, he hears a landline ring. He picks up his mobile and he records the sound. The next morning he's going to go and he's going to confront the neighbours because it very much sounds like it's coming from the walls. The next morning when he wakes up and he goes to play the recording to the neighbours, you can hear the ringing, and then you can very much hear the sound of an older man's voice telling him to get out. The couple next door tell him that nobody has stayed in that house for longer than a few months since they've lived next door. The family pack up, they put the house back up for sale, and they never look back. And I do not blame them.
Someone on here described the Grenfell tragedy as nightmare fuel, and I couldn't agree more. Innocent families instructed to stay inside a burning building until they died. It was the 14th of June 2017 when a panicked call came in to emergency services. It had been a quiet evening for them in London up until that point, but just after midnight all hell would break loose. A malfunctioning fridge freezer on a 4th floor flat of the Grenfell Tower caused a fire to break out. Now this wasn't anything out of the ordinary for the emergency services. They were very used to appliances setting on fire and just being able to put them out pretty quickly. However, a recent refurbishment of the Grenfell Tower and the installation of dangerous cladding caused the entire building to literally be engulfed in flames in minutes. There is a massive deep dive on my podcast, The Bourne Investigation, on Apple and Spotify if you want all of the details of the Grenfell disaster. But if you want the summary, keep watching. Very quickly, things got out of hand, and due to that new cladding, the fire spread at a staggering rate. Fire was literally flying upwards, and suddenly white-hot flames could be seen engulfing the entire building. More and more frantic calls started pouring into emergency services, who just began getting really overwhelmed. And the videos of the tower, if you've seen them, you'll know exactly what I mean. It honestly looks like a UK 9/11. By 1:27 a.m, the fire reached the roof of the building, where many residents had gone to seek cover. Families and children, meanwhile, were waking up dazed and confused, wondering what the hell was going on. They were waking up, opening their doors and being met with thick black smoke. And the advice right from the get-go was there was a stay-put policy in place. Now, this was apparently standard protocol in these high-rise flats, these kind of concrete buildings. The fire service would tell residents to stay indoors to essentially prevent any mass panic, chaos, people getting stuck on the stairwell. The thinking was that the thick concrete walls should have been enough to contain a fire to one flat. It was absolutely not the case. Due to the combustible cladding, the fire clearly spread throughout the entire building. One firefighter, David, spoke of how a woman had bumped into him and asked him to help her daughter, little Jessica. She was just 12 years old. Now, he recalled how he'd initially gone up the building in the lift because this was before he realised how bad this fire was, and when the door opened, all he could see was just this thick black smoke. That's when it dawned on him just how horrific this fire was. And he never found Jessica and eventually realised she'd passed away. As the fire spread uncontrollably, the stay put advice was reversed. After 2:30 a.m, they started encouraging people to just get out of this burning building by any means necessary. It was obvious by now that this was a deadly fire, but there were still around 100 people inside at this point. Firefighters literally raced up and down the narrow stairwells trying to rescue people, dragging out unconscious and conscious people. Every time residents would try and escape from their flat, they just opened the door and they were just gagging at this toxic smoke. People were throwing their pets out of the window to try and save them. Some people got bed sheets tied together to make like a rope to scale the building. As people tried to make a run for safety, they were slipping over unconscious and deceased people in the stairwells. Now, the heroic firefighters did manage to save many residents. It's reported that around 220, give or take, managed to escape. But tragically, 72 lives were lost. Children died, disabled people were just stuck in this burning building. There was no plan in place to evacuate disabled people in case of emergency. To really just demonstrate how powerful this fire was, it took 2.5 days to totally put the fire out. But the devastation was far from over. The aftermath of this tragedy included lies, protests, and that iconic Stormzy 2018 Brits performance. If you know, you know. For a full deep dive into the tragedy, head over to The Bourne Investigation on Spotify and Apple.
Today's story is about El Puente de los Duendes in Puebla, Mexico. Translation: the Bridge of the Duendes in Puebla, Mexico. This bridge is real. A lot of people have not gone to the bridge. Obviously, people can go if they want to. I've seen pictures of people capturing what they think is a duende in them, which is creepy. And just so you can get an idea, this is the actual Puente de los Duendes. So yeah, we'll make sure we won't go there. So the story goes, or I should say the legend goes, because it's because of the story I'm about to tell you, where people have been warned to like never go to this bridge. Kids who grow up in that area are warned to never go to that bridge. People claim that people who go there and get taken by the duendes don't don't come back. They say that the duendes are very bad and that they will drag people down to their bridge. And thanks to the one and only person who was able to escape is why we know what we know about this bridge. So there was this guy who had just left a party and he was really drunk. Because he was so cold at nighttime, he decided that before he went home, he was gonna go and get some wood so that he could start a fire. The only wood that he was able to get was really close to the bridge. Because of the stories that he had heard about the bridge and the duendes, he decided to get the wood really quickly and head back home. So as he turned around with the wood that he was able to get to go back home, he saw this really big chicken. He thought to himself, well, this chicken couldn't belong to anybody because everybody who has chickens would always have them in cages. He decided that he wanted to get that chicken so that he could take it home and eat it. However, when he would try to get the chicken, even though the chicken seemed to be moving very slowly, he wasn't able to capture it. And because he really wanted to eat that chicken, it was a big chicken, he really wanted to feed himself, he's like, I'm not giving up, I'm gonna get that chicken. He kept following this chicken until he realized that the chicken had stopped right in the middle of the bridge, and he realized that he was standing on one end of the bridge of the duendes. As he's realizing that he's standing on the edge of that bridge, he decides that he really wants to run, but his body betrayed him and he could not move. He said that it almost felt as if his body was like asleep, and all of a sudden he just started walking towards the bottom of the bridge without him wanting to go there. He said that as he was getting closer, he could hear laughters and like people talking under the bridge. That's also the moment where he turned to look at where the chicken was standing in the middle of the bridge, and he saw where that chunky, chicken he wanted to eat turned into this little person with a hood on. That this little duende was now looking at him, just laughing at the fact that they tricked him. For a moment, the guy was able to move his body by himself, like it wasn't asleep, it wasn't being controlled. He put his arm out and started praying, just saying prayers over and over and over again. After that, he remembers saying to himself, God, if my body is to be with these demons, at least let my soul go with you. In that moment, he heard where all these duendes started screaming almost like if they were in agony and pain. He remembers these duendes going to him, trying to attack him, but he regained full control of his body and he started running away from that bridge. He almost felt like he had blacked out. The next day in the morning when he woke up, he thought that everything that had happened to him the night before was a dream. However, he started feeling a lot of pain near his ankles. When he looked down, he had a lot of scratch marks and he was still bleeding from his ankles. Apparently, this duendes did try attacking him, but he managed to get away. When he finally got up and started walking out, there was literally a trail of blood from him running home and a lot of chicken feathers all over the place. He did continue walking until he realized that that blood trail was gonna end up at El Puente de los Duendes, at the bridge of the duendes. I would have never left my house after that, because what the hell? Also, the fact that this is the only story that we've heard from someone who has gotten away from them there, and because of that people refuse to go to this bridge, is so crazy. But what do you guys think?
Imagine moving into a house and then later finding out that someone was unalived there. Spooky story time. A follower named Susie sent me the story and we're going to call it The New House. Susie said that this happened in Georgia when she was about 11 years old. Moved into their new house and immediately she didn't get any weird vibe from it. And it was about the fourth night of them being there that she started feeling something weird going on. She said that her parents' friends ended up coming late one night. They were all relaxing in the living room and where she was standing was directly in front of her bedroom door. She said that everybody was talking and she suddenly hears a noise coming from her bedroom. She goes in there, doesn't think anything of it, and then she sees her Hello Kitty clock that she had just bought at the flea market. It was turned on. But she says the only way to turn this on is to actually flip the switch. So naturally, she's like, okay, how did this turn on? Turns it off and she walks out of her bedroom. She tries not to let it scare her. She doesn't close the door all the way, so she's still standing in the same place. And not even 5 minutes later, she feels something or someone grab her from her belt loop of her shorts and kind of tug her back. Obviously, she's freaked out. Immediately, she tells her mom, and her mom tells her, don't worry. You're probably dreaming and you're tired. Go lay down. A few months go by. She's looking for something and she's there digging through and she clearly hears something whisper right by her ear, where is it? She runs crying, goes and tells her sister, and of course her sister goes and checks and there's nothing there. Don't you hate when that happens? She says at this point a few years go by and she's constantly hearing little things, weird noises, whispers, but she doesn't say anything because she knows that they're not going to believe her. And she's heard that the more attention you give something, the more it kind of wants to reveal itself to you. So at this point, she's just kind of over it. Fast forward, she's 16 years old and she's getting ready for bed. She goes into her restroom, is brushing her teeth, and she's getting ready to spit out that toothpaste. And as she's getting ready to do so, she literally hears that exact same sound right by her ear. And then she says that her hair was kind of like this and it kind of moved like someone blew like right by her ear, like, and her hair moved. Oh, hell no. She's literally panicking. She's screaming, goes and tells her sister, and her sister says that she normally doesn't believe in this kind of stuff, but the fear that her sister had in her face was like, okay, she's not lying. So now Susie's sister ends up seeing something, the one that isn't really a believer. She's walking down the hallway. She happens to look inside her parents' bedroom, and there is a woman standing right in front of the mirror. And Susie says there is always stuff going on, and finally her mom sees something. They're relaxing in the living room watching TV, and there is one of those little balls that you win from the gumball machines, and it just bounces into the living room, but it was just Susie and her mom there. They ended up moving out a few years later, and Susie's mom finally confessed and said that she would occasionally hear footsteps, whispers, cabinets opening and closing. And she said that she didn't want to pay too much attention to what Susie and her sisters were saying because, one, she didn't want to scare them, but she also knows that the more attention you give something, the more it's going to come out. What's really scary is that after they move out, they found out that years ago, a husband had unalived his wife at that front doorstep. And they think that that was the woman that Susie's sister saw in her parents' bedroom. She's older now. She doesn't live in that house, but she says that till this day, she still has dreams of living in that house, being trapped and being haunted in that house. Thank you so much to Susie for sending me this spooky story. If you guys have any paranormal ghost stories that you'd like for me to read, please send them via DM or email, and I'd love to read them. And I will see you guys in the next spooky story. Bye!
What's the weirdest thing that ever happened to you that made you think that God was real? And I'm not talking about believing in some kind of universal energy. I'm talking...
I got another one. Go back on my page and look at the recent post that I made because I told like one of the stories that I had a situation like this. But I have another one, and it's perfect how people's paths cross, and it's not for the reason that you would think. So a few years ago, I was messing with this dude, and he was from out of town, so he had let me know when he was coming into town, and we was just going to spend some time together, go out on a date, whatever like that. After having our little night together or whatever, later in the night, we decided to just sit in a random parking lot near the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, because that's where I live. So we decided to sit in a parking lot across from the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. We're just in the car, we're talking, we're smoking, you know, we're laughing, we're literally just having a good time. So while we're sitting there, mind you, before we got here to this spot, we had spent probably about an hour and a half just driving around the city. Weren't able to find anything to do, didn't know where we wanted to sit. We didn't want to get bothered by the police. We didn't, you know, so we were just trying to find somewhere to end up. And that was just like a quick area for us to just stop and park and figure out if that's where we wanted to chill at. So while we're sitting right there having our conversation, we hear this kind of like thump off in the background, but it was like, it wasn't too loud. So it was just kind of like, we kind of kept talking, but I was like, did you hear that? So he's like, yeah, and we're like, I think it's coming from over there. So in the direction that we're looking in, there's just like a bushes and stuff like that, so you can't really see past it. So I'm like, I think it's coming from over there. We literally sat in silence for like 5 minutes, just kind of looking back and forth at each other. And I was like, should we go over there? And he was like, man, I don't know. I don't know these parts for real and everything. And I'm like, I don't know. I think I want to see what's going on. So we get out the car, we walk to the corner. And I see a man's car is parked like in the middle of the street. His car is parked in the middle of the street, and he's out with his hands on his head. Like, he's just like, oh my God. So once we walk a little closer to him, we see that there's a man on the ground. It turns out that this man on the ground was walking across the street from the gas station, and the man that was driving had turned the corner by the gas station and ran him over in the middle of the street because he didn't see him. I feel like the man was drunk because he definitely did try to take off. You know, he didn't take off immediately. He wanted to make sure the man was okay, but he wanted to take off before the police got there. I saw the man laying on the ground, and everybody else thought he was dead. He had blood coming out of his head, trigger warning. He had blood coming out of his head. His arms was twisted in different positions and stuff. I thought he was dead. When I got closer to him, I noticed he was still alive. And luckily, even though I didn't really know this man like that I was kind of dating at the time, he was in the army. So he knew how to basically stabilize this man until the emergency people got there. So we're standing there and people are standing on the street just looking like, oh my God, oh my God. So I call the police. And the man that I'm here on a date with, he swoops down and he takes off his hoodie and he wraps it around the man's head and he's holding the pressure on his head and he's like, okay, I need you to keep talking to me, man. I need you to keep talking to me. So at this point, I'm like trembling and I'm getting pissed off because there's grown men standing around and they're not calling anybody. They're not doing anything. They're just like looking and recording and stuff like that. So I'm on the phone with the ambulance. I'm telling them exactly where we are, that we need the police. We need somebody to come out here. This man is on the verge of death. Like his head is cracked open on the concrete. We need somebody here. So it gets to the point where we literally realize that me and him are the only ones trying to help the situation. Other people are just kind of like talking around us. And he was like, okay, I don't care what none of y'all talking about. I'm not trying to hear what none of y'all talking about. I need you to do this. I need you to do that. And he started taking over the scene, trying to get the men around him to help him stabilize this man. So I got off the phone with the ambulance and everything like that. And the whole time he was sitting there stabilizing this man, I got down on my knees in the middle of the street in the middle of the night and I started praying as hard as I could. And I was the only person praying. And I was praying for this man's soul. I was praying that he gets saved. I was praying that he be healed. And if he wasn't going to make it through that accident, that he be taken up to heaven unharmed. I was praying hard for this stranger that I really did not know. And I really was not the type to pray. But something told me that you need to pray for this man's soul right now, or he's going to leave his body. Even if you don't know him, you need to pray for this man's soul right now. So I'm trembling, I'm praying on the street. He's holding his head together over there with the hoodie and everything like that. Then the ambulance comes. The ambulance comes and they swoop down and they're trying to help him out with the guy. So he's telling the ambulance people like, this is what's wrong with him. This is where the blood is coming from. This is what I did. And it turns out that he had stabilized that man and that man would have bled out and died. And the type of pressure that was coming on his head from the way his head hit the concrete, it would have killed him. But because he readjusted his neck and put the hoodie on him and everything like that, that literally saved his life long enough for the ambulance to pull up and be able to stabilize him in there. And they were like, you actually did a great job and you are a big help to the situation. That man didn't die. Me and that boy also never ended up in an actual relationship and kind of just parted ways, a few months after that. And it was never any bad blood or anything like that. It was just like, we just weren't really compatible. And it turns out that I feel like God put us together for that moment. I don't know.
I will never understand how people just vanish into thin air, especially in this case where he was seen entering a really popular packed bar, yet he was never seen leaving. How within literally 5 minutes, he just vanished off the face of the earth. What gets me though is that for 5 months after he disappeared, his girlfriend would call his phone every single night wondering what happened to him. Usually it would just go straight to voicemail, but one random night, it rang 3 times. No one ever picked up, and his phone company said that it was probably just a glitch. But his phone actually connected and pinged off of a cell tower 14 miles away from where he went missing. Some think he's still alive, while others think that something horrible happened to him that caused him to go missing. This is the mysterious disappearance of Brian Schaefer, and it really does keep me up at night wondering what happened to him. So let's talk about it. Brian Schaefer was 27 years old when he suddenly and very mysteriously disappeared in 2006. He was studying to become a doctor at Ohio State University College of Medicine, and he was incredibly smart. He already had a degree in microbiology, and those who knew him said that he was incredibly funny, charismatic, and outgoing. And although his studies were really serious, his dream was to actually join a band and live somewhere on an island. During his second year at OSU, his mom died following a battle with cancer, and this really shook Brian because his family was really close. Now it was just his dad Randy and his younger brother Derek, and although the death of his mom was difficult, he leaned on them to get through it. He also leaned on his girlfriend Alexis, who was also a medical student at OSU. They were pretty serious, and both of their families thought that Brian was actually going to propose to Alexis during a Miami trip that they had planned starting early April 2006 for spring break. Sadly, this would never happen, as he would soon disappear, leaving behind no answers. This brings us to March 31st, 2006. It was a Friday, and classes at OSU had just ended, kid, so everyone was really excited. To celebrate, Brian met up with his dad at a steakhouse to have dinner. His dad said that Brian seemed really exhausted that night. He'd spent the last few nights pulling all-nighters to study for a critical upcoming exam, so Brian was running on basically no sleep. Brian told his dad that later that night he was going to be meeting up with one of his friends and former roommates named Clint to continue the celebration. Looking back, his dad really didn't think that he should go because he was just so tired, but he never said anything to stop him. This would be the last time that he ever heard from or saw Brian. Later that night at around 9 p.m., Brian texted his younger brother Derek to see if he wanted to meet up. Derek couldn't, so Brian continued on without him. Again, this would be the last time that his brother would ever hear from him. So 9 p.m. hits, and Brian and Clint meet up at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, which is a bar in the South Campus Gateway Complex in Columbus, Ohio. It was a pretty popular bar that was always packed full of people. About an hour later, Brian called his girlfriend Alexis and told her that he was just out drinking with some friends. At the time, Alexis was out of town visiting some family before she and Brian took off for Miami. Brian told her he loved her and would see her in a couple of days, and then he hung up. Brian and Clint spent the night bar hopping, working their way down to the Arena District. According to Clint, at each place they stopped, both he and Brian would take a shot. Just after midnight, the two of them met up with a woman named Meredith, who was one of Clint's friends. This took place in a neighborhood called the Short North. Meredith gave them all a ride back to the Ugly Tuna Saloona, which was going to be their last stop of the night. They all planned to take one last round of drinks and then go home. All three of them went up the escalator to the bar's main entrance at 1:15 a.m., and overall the night continued to go well. But at some point, a small verbal argument between Clint and Brian took place. What that was about, no one knows. After this, Brian became separated from his friends. At 2 a.m., the bar officially closed, so Clint and Meredith waited outside for Brian to come down the escalator with the other people at the bar, but he never did. The two of them tried calling Brian a handful of times, but he never answered, and figuring he must have just went back to his apartment without telling them, they left without him. Brian lived only 6 blocks away from the Ugly Tuna Saloona, and he wasn't a stranger to the area, so they didn't worry too much about him possibly walking home alone. But as the weekend progressed, Brian still wasn't answering anyone's phone calls. Not his girlfriend's, not his friends, and not even his dad's. And when Monday morning rolled around and he failed to show up for his flight with Alexis to go on their long-awaited Miami trip, everyone knew something was horribly wrong. This is when Brian was officially reported missing to the Columbus police. Authorities first began their search at the last place Brian was known to be, the Ugly Tuna Saloona. This area is not a stranger to crime, and because of unrelated incidents, the Gateway building, which is where the bar was located in, installed security cameras. After going through all of the footage, authorities found that Clint, Meredith, and Brian had entered the bar at 1:15 a.m., like I mentioned earlier. The last time Brian was ever seen on this security footage was at 1:55 a.m., and he was talking to two women right outside the main entrance of the bar, which is where the escalator is located. He's then seen saying goodbye to these girls and then walking out of frame back into the bar. But here's where things start to get strange. The security camera never recorded Brian ever leaving the bar. Not right after saying goodbye, not even 5 minutes later when the bar closed and everyone started leaving. He seemingly entered the bar and then never left. The only other possible exit in this bar was through a service door, which was usually off limits to the public. It was close to where Brian was last seen on camera, but again, no one ever really used that door. It led out to a first floor hallway in this building that was a big construction area. This construction site had its own exterior exit, but it was a really messy area. It would have been difficult to walk through sober, let alone intoxicated, which Brian most likely was at this point. Authorities found that this construction area did have cameras, so they were hoping that it would provide them with a lead, but sadly, it did not. One camera continuously panned throughout the construction site while the other was operated manually, yet neither of them ever showed Brian in this area. Police say there is a slight possibility that Brian just somehow missed being recorded on these cameras, but really, he likely would have been seen if he went in this area. Police then started looking through other security footage from nearby bars and other businesses, but not a single one ever captured Brian either leaving the bar or the area. It was like he walked into the bar and then just vanished into thin air. This kicked off a massive search for him, spreading out miles in every direction. Police brought in tracking and cadaver dogs, and they searched every dumpster and even down below in the sewer systems. Authorities also searched along the Olentangy River, which ran through Columbus and near the OSU campus, but not a single trace of Brian was ever found. Also on the search list was Brian's apartment, which was only 6 blocks away from the bar, but his car was still out front and nothing appeared to be amiss inside. This is when police started wondering if this wasn't an accident or a foul play type of situation. They looked closely at the fact that Brian's mom had recently passed away just weeks before he disappeared, so they thought that he could just be off somewhere trying to grieve alone. But absolutely no evidence points to that, and as of today, Brian remains missing. His family also doesn't believe that he would just run off like this without saying anything. After his disappearance, everyone who was with Brian that night was asked to take take a polygraph test. This included his own dad and Meredith. They both agreed and passed, but Clint outright refused. He soon got a lawyer who advised him against taking the test and to stop talking to authorities. And those close to this case say that once police got involved, Clint pretty much went no contact with everyone. Years later, the last two women who were seen talking to Brian right before he disappeared said they were never asked to take a polygraph test. For 5 months after Brian went missing, his girlfriend Alexis continued to call his phone every single night to see if he would ever pick up. Usually it would just go straight to voicemail, but on one September night, Brian's phone rang 3 times. She kept calling it because this was kind of a shock, but no one ever answered. Brian's cell phone company, which was Singular, said that it was probably just a computer glitch, but here's the thing. During that phone call that rang 3 times, Brian's phone actually connected and pinged off a cell tower in Hilliard. Hilliard is 14 miles northwest of Columbus, where he went missing. Could this have been him or someone involved in his disappearance? No one knows. Over the years, there have been so many tips that continue to flow in, and even potential sightings of Brian in places like Michigan, Texas, and even Sweden. But none of them have ever been confirmed. And although we don't know what really happened to Brian that night, there are a few theories. Theory number 1 is that Brian is alive somewhere, living in an unknown location under a new identity. Some even suspect that he could have amnesia or some other mental health issue that causes him to not know who he is. But there's no evidence to support this theory. Theory number 2 is that he died either that night or shortly after as a result of an accident. Maybe he slipped and fell somewhere and just died, either somewhere in the city or even the construction site at the bar, and we just haven't found him yet. Cadaver dogs were brought in and they searched everywhere, including that construction site, but they never picked up on any trace or scent of Brian. And again, there is no evidence to suggest this theory either. Theory number 3 is that Brian was a victim of foul play, whether by a stranger at the bar, someone close to him like one of his friends, or some even suggest that he was a victim of the smiley face killer. The smiley face killer is a theory about a group of serial killers who target college-age men, killing them and dumping their bodies in local waterways. They usually leave a smiley face painting near the death site. Since Brian has never been found though, and no smiley faces have ever been found anywhere near where he went missing, police have dismissed this theory, which is good because this theory has never been proven to actually be true. Brian's family thinks Clint may know more than he's letting on and should have been more forthcoming after he disappeared. But his family believes that Brian is likely deceased at this point, and they don't feel that he would have just run off like this. Clint has always maintained his innocence and denies any part in Brian's disappearance. The main investigator on this case says that he can say with 100% certainty that after reviewing the security footage of the bar that night, that Brian did not leave via the escalator, which is the main entrance of the bar. What's really sad is that in late 2008, Brian's dad Randy died in a freak accident. He was outside in his yard picking up debris in a severe storm when he was struck and killed by a huge branch that had fallen off of a tree. His neighbors found his body the next day. In just 2 years, 3 members of the Schaefer family were gone, now leaving only Brian's younger brother. Part of their dad's obituary came with an online condolence book where people could leave their thoughts. One of the signatures stood out to investigators because it read, quote, "To Dad, love Brian from the U.S. Virgin Islands." End quote. Everyone thought this could really be Brian, but after investigating, police found that it was a hoax. The signature came from a public computer somewhere in Franklin County, Ohio. Who would do that is beyond me. These stories scare me so much. How 1 minute you can be here and the next you're gone. Or how someone can disappear in a room full of people, never to be seen again. But it's now been 19 years, and whatever happened to Brian that night at the bar remains a mystery.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
She herself called dispatch from her kidnapper's phone mid-kidnap and they still failed her. Denise Amber Lee was born in Inglewood, Florida to her father Rick and her mother Sue. She's been described as loving, caring, warm, welcoming, and fiercely protective over her children. When she was younger, she was extremely academically gifted. She loved math, she loved to read and write, and she had the kind of personality that was very friendly, very warm, but definitely more quiet, more on the reserve side. When she was in her senior year of high school, Denise met a boy named Nathan, and Nathan was the more outgoing, loud, popular kind of guy. They have been described as the epitome of opposites attract. They started dating, and for their very first Valentine's date together, Nathan gave Denise a heart-shaped ring, and she adored it. It was her favorite piece of jewelry. She wore it all the time. She wore it until her very last day on this earth. Denise and Nathan quickly became obsessed with one another, and their relationship blossomed from boyfriend and girlfriend to husband and wife. They ended up having 2 beautiful babies together, and when they became a family of 4, they moved to Northport, Florida, into a cute little house. There, Nathan was working 3 jobs to support his family financially. Denise was a stay-at-home mom, and her favorite job in the world was being a mom. That being said, though, financially, at some points, they did face struggles, but they were the kind of family that would say that they were so rich in love, and they really were. They were so happy, so loving, and so loved by so many people. January 17th of 2008 was a Thursday. Normal day for the family. Nathan got up early, left for work. Denise stayed at home with the kids. And close to lunchtime, Denise and Nathan spoke on the phone. They talked about random things. They talked about how nice the weather was, and Nathan suggested that Denise open up the windows and let the natural air come inside, and she told him that she already did. That was the last time that Nathan and Denise would ever speak again. On his way home from work around 3 to 3:30, Nathan called Denise, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried calling again and again, but it kept going to voicemail. He finally got home just after 3:30 p.m. and he noticed that the windows were closed, which he thought was a little bit weird because Denise had mentioned to him that she had left them open for the day. Regardless, didn't think much of it, but when he walked inside, Denise was nowhere to be found. On top of that, both of their kids were in the same crib, alone, crying, which was weird in itself. But when Nathan walked over to the kids, noticed that their diapers were dirty, he immediately knew that something was wrong because Denise took such good care of her little babies that for them to be not only unattended, alone, and crying, but also with dirty diapers, Nathan knew in his gut that something was very wrong, and he had said that in that moment he felt like he was starting to lose it. Everything in this case moved so fast, by the way, so immediately he called 911 and he told them the story that he just got home from work, his kids were alone, his wife is nowhere to be found, and right after ending that phone call, he called Denise's father, Rick, who was actually a detective, and because of that, he was on it the second that he heard that his daughter was missing. He called multiple law enforcement agencies in different counties to spread the word as fast as possible to make sure that everyone would be on the lookout for Denise. Within half an hour, Rick had managed to have police dogs, officers on foot and in vehicles, and helicopters searching for Denise. It has been said that this search was one of the most massive cooperative search efforts in the area at that time. When officers arrived at the house to meet with Nathan and talk to him, Denise's neighbor stepped outside and she told them that around 2:30 p.m. that day, she had seen a green Camaro driving up and down the road. She told them that she originally noticed it because she thought it was weird because the same car circled around the same street 4 to 5 times and the driver was driving super slow. She then saw it pulled into Denise's driveway. She stepped out of her house 10 minutes or so later, and by that point the car was driving away and she didn't see Denise inside the vehicle. At 6:14 p.m., police get a huge break in the case. The Sarasota County Sheriff's Office received a 911 call from Denise herself. It is sickening. It made me want to faint. It's so sad. Denise, somehow, some way, had managed to get a hold of her kidnapper's phone without his knowledge, and she called 911. But on the phone, she can be heard screaming for help, but she's talking to her kidnapper. So she's kind of saying everything in code on the phone to the operator to make it sound like she was really talking to him so that he wouldn't suspect that she was on the phone. So when the dispatcher was asking her questions, you can hear her try to answer in a way that wouldn't make her kidnapper be suspicious, but she's very much in distress, very much freaking out, very much yelling. You can hear her screaming on the phone saying, please let me go, please let me go, please I need help, I don't know where we are, please help me. And it takes a few seconds for the dispatcher to catch on, but then she starts asking questions and Denise begins answering them in sort of a code. So the dispatcher says, what is your name? And Denise yells out, please let me go, I just want to see my family again, I'm sorry, please let me go, please, my name is Denise, I'm married to a beautiful husband and I just want to see my kids again, please. And the dispatcher then says, are you on I-75? And Denise, talking to her kidnapper, says, where are we? Can't you just tell me where we are, please? It's shattering, that phone call. It's horrible. Denise is very clearly begging for her life. And then you can hear the man on the phone saying, where's my phone? What did you do with my phone? And then the call ends. That phone call did 2 things. It, 1, confirmed that Denise was being held against her will by a strange man who she did not know, but 2, it also gave her family members hope because that was proof that she was still alive, and because of how quick her husband was to report her missing, because of how quick her father was to get everyone involved to get the search started as quickly as possible, they started seeing light at the end of the tunnel. They were doing all of the right things, and they now knew that she was still alive, and her husband along with her parents were holding on to hope that they would be able to find her. Because Because that 911 phone call from Denise was made from a burner phone, they could not track its location, but what they could do is track down the name of the person who purchased that phone, and that is when they got the name 36-year-old Michael King. Denise made that 911 call at 6:14 p.m. At 6:23 p.m., authorities got another 911 call from a 17-year-old girl named Sabrina. She was calling to actually report something that happened to her father. So she said that her father was Harold. He had a cousin named Michael King, and that sometime between 5:30 p.m. and 6 p.m., Michael had driven to Harold's house. He showed up out of the blue asking to borrow a flashlight, a gas can, and a shovel, saying that he needed it because he got his lawnmower stuck in his front yard or something like that. And when Harold turned around to go inside of the house to grab those things, he heard a woman's voice coming from Michael's car saying, "Call the police." And Harold turns around and he's like, "What was that? Who is that? What's going on here?" And his cousin Michael looks at him and says, "Nothing, don't worry about it." So Harold didn't worry about it. He turned back around and started walking back towards the house, but he looked back one more time and saw Michael crawling over the console inside of his green Camaro and pushing down a woman's head into his car. Michael then climbed into the driver's seat and drove away. Harold then called his daughter Sabrina to tell her about the very alarming interaction that he just had with his cousin Michael, and Sabrina called 911 to report it. That was at 6:14 p.m. Only minutes after that phone call, so at 6:30 p.m., police received yet another 911 call. A woman named Jane called 911. She was stopped at a red light on Highway 41, and she said that she heard a really loud scream coming from the car next to her. She said, quote, "It was a very high-pitched scream. It was unlike any type of scream I had ever heard in my entire life." And when she heard that scream, she was actually on the phone with her sister, and the scream was so loud that her sister on the other side of the phone heard it. Jane looked over at the car next to her because they were stopped at the same red light, and she made eye contact with the driver, who was a man. It looked like he was pushing something or someone down in the backseat of his car, and when Jane tried to get a closer look to see what he was pushing down, she saw a hand come up from the backseat of the car, and the hand was trying to slap the window as if it was someone pleading for help, and it was Denise. So Jane calls 911 immediately to report this. She's on the phone with the operator when she's still trying to keep track and follow this green Camaro. So she says, "I need help. I think that someone is being kidnapped in the vehicle next to me." She describes the vehicle, a green Camaro, describes the man, Michael King, and she starts trying to drive slower so she can get behind him so she can read off the license plate, but the green Camaro would not let her go. Michael King noticed that this woman was looking at him, so he eventually managed to change lanes until he was eventually behind her, and then he exited the highway, and Jane could not catch up to him due to traffic. I already mentioned this, but we do know that the person inside of that vehicle was 21-year-old Denise Amber Lee. And guess what? Even though there were police officers everywhere keeping an eye out for this green Camaro, for whatever reason, the details of Jane's 911 call, the details that she gave them in real time, were never reported to officers. No one reported her call because everyone thought that someone else was doing it, so nobody did. So all of the officers that were extremely close to that area were never made aware that the green Camaro was right there. Later that night at 9 p.m., officers were near Interstate 75 still looking out for this green Camaro when they saw it. They saw the green Camaro matching the license plate that they were looking for, followed it, and forced the driver to pull over. And it took him a little while, but eventually Michael King walked out of his car. His pants were wet from the waist down, and he had mud on his shoes. They found a phone inside of his vehicle, but the SIM card and the battery had been removed. They also found a gas can and a shovel with dirt on it, but no Denise. He was arrested, charged with kidnapping, and taken to the station for questioning, and he denied everything. He denied having anything to do with her disappearance at all, and refused to give them any information about Denise or about her whereabouts. On the morning of January 19th, 2008, a few heart-wrenching days after Denise disappeared and only 2 days after Michael's arrest, the search came to a heartbreaking end. An area on the ground near Northport was discovered, and 3 feet buried in the ground, officers found Denise's body. She was found lying in a fetal position. Denise had a single weapon wound to the head, which was her cause of death, and the medical examiner was able to determine that the injury was consistent with a weapon being pressed against her head right in between her eyebrows. She was killed less than 3 miles away from where Jane made that 911 call on the highway. And in a heartbreaking detail, the autopsy also revealed that she continued to breathe for a period of time after the injury was inflicted. She had bruises all over her body, the worst ones being across her wrist. She was also covered in defensive injuries, meaning that she fought for her life until the very last second. there was also clear evidence of brutal SA. Michael King was charged with Denise's murder, to which he pleaded not guilty. His trial began August 24th of 2009, and we know that the prosecution had multiple not only witnesses but also recorded 911 calls, one from Denise herself. But apart from that, they also had DNA evidence. Denise's shorts were found hundreds of yards away from her body, and inside of those shorts, police were able to recover male DNA that matched Michael's profile. This was from the SA. Inside of his house, duct tape was found with strands of Denise's hair attached to it, and because Denise was so quick on her feet, she herself had left evidence inside of Michael's vehicle. I like to think that she did that on purpose to make sure that he would be caught. Inside of his vehicle, police found strands of her hair that they believe that she pulled out and left on purpose. Outside of his vehicle, they also found her palm print left on the outside of the driver's seat window. And they also heartbreakingly found the heart-shaped ring that Nathan had given to her for their first ever Valentine's Day together. It was left inside of Michael's car. Officers believe that on the day that she disappeared, Michael approached her house, saw her from the outside sitting out in the backyard cutting her son's hair, and forced her out of the car and into his car. They believe, as do I and everyone else, that Denise protected her babies until the very end and convinced Michael to leave them in that crib together unharmed. She protected her children until the very last second, and she fought for her life until she no longer could. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and found Michael guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. Every single juror, all 12 of them, voted for the death penalty. After Denise's passing, Nathan refused to let her memory fade. He started the Denise Amberly Foundation, fighting for better 911 training and raising public awareness so no one else would be failed the way that Denise was. Her father fought just as hard, pushing for what became the Denise Amberly Act. That law provides voluntary training for 911 operators. Denise Amberly was so incredibly brave. She was so incredibly loved. She was someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's friend, and she left behind her 2 little babies in this world. She was failed massively, and I can only hope that her story continues to bring awareness in the way that it should. But that is all I have for today's video. Let me know what your thoughts are on this case. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
The twists and turns in this I was not expecting, but warning. This video is about a true crime case. If you are not into that and you do not like to hear about, then do not watch this video. You have been warned. Now let's get into this case. Okay, so in 1956, 21-year-old Diane Kidder went to go work at her father's store in Peoria, Illinois. She needed the money given the fact she was recently divorced and was raising her 2-year-old daughter, Susie. And it was in that store, one day, she met a man by the name Gene Kydell, who was a bachelor. People who knew Gene said that he was not the best looking, but he was a really good talker. A very good talker. And he was able to win over Diane. Diane and Gene date for about a year before they get married. The two soon decide to move to Arizona. There, Gene starts working at a constructions company. Soon the couple have children of their own. They have 3. They have Greg, Kelly, and Lori. After the two had been together for some time, the two come to the terms that they need to get a divorce, and it is no longer healthy for either of them to be in a relationship. So move on to September 17th. The two, Diane and Gene, meet at a restaurant for dinner to discuss the final details of the property settlement and visitation rights with the children. The meeting seemingly went fine, and then after the two left the restaurant, Diane drops Gene off at his apartment. After Diane drops her ex-husband off at his apartment, Diane drives to a place called the Amber Inn, where she meets with a man by the name of Bob Marlin. This is a man that she has been seeing after her separation with Gene. A few hours later, Gene calls Diane's home, and their children answer the phone, and he's talking to the kids, and the kids tell him that mom isn't home yet. So since the kids are home alone and she should have been home, Gene decides to go over there to babysit his kids to wait for his ex-wife to come home. As he's over there waiting, it gets so late that he just falls asleep on the couch. The next morning, Gene says he finds his ex-wife's car in the driveway, but there's no sign of her. This is when Gene calls 911 to report his ex-wife missing. According to Gene, his ex-wife Diane never returned home. Detective Emma Groom said that Diane had to have arrived home because her car was obviously there. Her purse was in the house, her keys were in the house. Diane had no reason to run away. There was no motive for her to just leave behind her 3 children. Her family described her as an excellent mother and very concerned about her children. So police decide to interview Bob Marlin. This is the man that she had met up with the night that she had disappeared. But then they find out some crazy information. The day after Diane's disappearance, Bob actually had a heart attack and passed away. 2 days after Diane's disappearance, her ex-husband Gene moves back into the family home to watch after his 3 children. Over time, Gene, Diane's ex-husband, tells pretty much everyone that Diane up and left to go run off and be with another man. And over time, the children adjusted to life without their mama. 4 months later, tragedy is among this family once again. It's late at night and Gene, the children's father, is at a nearby laundromat when a fire breaks out at the home with the 4 children inside. The oldest of the 4 children, Susie, directs all the children to safety. She's trying to get them out. But then the youngest one, Lori, runs back to her bedroom to get her Winnie the Pooh stuffed animal. And whenever Susie chases back after her, like, Lori, we have to go, the fire just succumbs most of that area and they cannot get out. So Susie covers up Lori to keep her protected, and she's telling Lori, help is coming, we're gonna be okay, we're gonna get out. And she told Lori that she loved her and that she was never going to leave her. Susie gave her life protecting her little sister Lori and sadly passed away. 8-year-old Kelly also passed away in the fire. And 9-year-old Greg survived as well. Their father, Gene, arrived just as firemen were pulling all the kids from the blaze. After 4 months in the hospital burn unit, the youngest of the children, Lori, goes back to live at her family home that her father had to rebuild because of the fire. But 1 year later, there's an incident that occurs that helps Lori realize the truth of what happened to her mother. It happened when Lori went to a funeral with her father. The funeral was for a man that was a family friend. He had passed away in the Vietnam War. His name was Michael. During the funeral, Lori is a little girl and she is confused. She asks her dad, Gene, when is Michael going to wake up? Gene tells her he's not waking up, he's not alive. This sends Lori into a traumatic outburst and she starts screaming at everybody at the funeral, telling everybody, no, wake him up, he needs to wake up. She was so adamant that he was just sleeping and she was not going to let them put this man in the ground when he was just asleep. It's going to take another 27 years for Lori to reveal the deep family secret. It's 1993. After Diane has been missing for 27 years, her youngest daughter, Lori, goes to the police department with a written statement. This statement had details of a long-kept family secret she had been scared to speak on for 27 years. Go to part 2. This is part 2 about the disappearance of Diane Kidder. So after Lori goes to the police station with this written statement, she gives it to investigators and they read it. This paper contained details about how her father, Gene, was very violent, about how when she was 5 years old, she witnessed her father kill her mother and bury her in the backyard. Lori says that she thought her mom was sleeping, like hibernating animals do. Lori said that at one point, she asked her father if she could dig a hole in the backyard to feed her mother. Lori stated that as a 5-year-old, she thought that her father made her mother go to sleep and that he buried her sleeping mother in the backyard. Lori said that she wasn't confused on where her mother was. She wasn't confused on who did it. She was confused between sleeping and death. If you remember earlier, I said that Lori had went to a funeral with her father for a family friend that had passed away in the Vietnam War. It was at that moment Lori realized that her mother wasn't waking up. Police were very skeptical of Lori's story, but they said that she seemed pretty convincing, and her mother had been missing for 27 years. Lori said that the next day after he buried her mother, he poured concrete over that area. Now, it being so many years later, the house has obviously been sold to new owners, and the police officers are hesitant to ask these new owners if they can dig up their backyard in case nothing was there and Lori was just wrong. So the police officers decide to find a machine that can look through concrete to see if there was any disturbance under it, like in the dirt. So they go ahead and look around and they come across something called a ground penetrating radar system, which can look through concrete to see if there's been any disturbance underneath. They use this in the new owner's backyard, and there is in fact a disturbance in the dirt. You can't see what it is, it just shows that there is a disturbance underground. It's exactly where Lori said her mother was. They measure this disturbance, and it equals out to be about the same length that Diane would have been. They remove this concrete, and they dig only 10 inches before discovering what's been there for 27 years. The skeletal remains of Diane Kidder. Police immediately arrest Gene Kidell for murder. Lori is now ready to tell the story of what happened to her mother the night she disappeared, on September 17th, 1966. Like I said earlier, it's the night that Diane met up with her ex-husband Gene at a restaurant to discuss the final details of their divorce and visitation rights with their children. She then takes Gene to his apartment after the meeting. Then she went to meet with her new boyfriend. A few hours later, Gene calls Diane's home. And when the kids answer and say that Diane wasn't home yet, Gene goes over there to wait on her to get home. When Diane arrived home, the two fought, waking their 5-year-old daughter Lori and her sister Susie. The two girls went to see what was happening. Lori said that when her mother seen that her two children were watching this altercation, that she took down her defense and calmed down because she knew her babies were watching. Lori said that it was then her father Gene gave her mother Diane her final blow, and Diane fell backwards and hit her head, and then she slipped to the floor. The two little girls run back to their bedroom. Their father takes their mother outside to the backyard and buries her, along with their family's biggest secret that stayed a secret for 27 years.